Hello and welcome to this third video on the themes of Macbeth. So Shakespeare is really interested in this idea of the divine right of kings. So the view at the time was that the king is appointed by God and therefore represents God on earth, not as a holy being, but as the person rightfully appointed as king. Now this was a belief necessary in order to stop people thinking, well, if we don't like this king, we'll just get rid of him. But the idea is no matter how much you dislike the king, this person has been placed there by God, and therefore you simply have to make the best of it. And who are you, normal people, to decide what is in the mind of God? So what appears wrong to you might be part of a wider purpose, a wider plan, which is God's secret purpose, secret plan, and therefore we are too ignorant, being merely mortals, to fully understand it. Now, why this is important is there's a lot of political opposition at the time to the idea of King James coming from Scotland to rule over the English. You'll know from your studying of the context that in 1605, the year before this play was performed, the Gunpowder Plot threatened to kill not just King James, but also most of Parliament, so all the MPs, because the gunpowder was supposed to explode underneath the Great Hall where everyone was meeting. So let's take a step back and think about Shakespeare's portrayal of Duncan. So although Duncan is weak in the sense that he doesn't spot Macbeth's cunning, and he also doesn't spot that the Thane of Cawdor is a traitor, he is nevertheless a really good man in terms of what we might expect from a Christian person. So clear in his great office, hath borne his faculties so meek. So meek means mild, he's not cruel at all in any way. His virtues will plead like angels. So he imagines that there are so many wonderful things about Duncan that when he dies, these wonderful things will be like angels taking him to heaven. And this is Macbeth realizing that he's going against God and will surely be punished, not just his soul, not just in heaven, but perhaps also on earth. So he's actually looking at this and thinking, do you know, I probably won't get away with it, but I want it so much that I'm going to risk it anyway. Well, while he's arguing about this, he says this to himself. But in these cases, we still have judgment. So if I use my intellect and try and judge things, I'm going to decide that Duncan is the rightful king. I'm going to do what God wants, and I'm not going to kill Duncan. And here's another reason, that we but teach bloody instructions, which being taught, return to plague the inventor. So he knows if he kills Duncan, this is like a lesson which he's teaching in blood. It's a bloody instruction, and once it's taught, his pupils, in other words the other thanes, will come back and plague him with it. They'll assassinate him in the way that he assassinated Duncan. So this again brings us to Shakespeare's message, not about Macbeth himself, but about King James. What he's saying is there's no point assassinating King James. Whatever lord is trying to gain power and oust King James, it won't work. All that will happen is that someone else will come and oust that lord and kill them. In other words, it's better to accept that God knows what he's doing and will keep this king even if we don't like him, because he's better than the alternative, which will be constant conflict, constant civil unrest, and perhaps even civil war. Then we look at who succeeds Macbeth, which is Malcolm, of course, Duncan's son. Now Malcolm, when he's talking to Macduff, has a scene that's often cut where he pretends that he would make a terrible, terrible king, and therefore Macduff shouldn't support him in becoming King of Scotland. Now, why he does this is because Shakespeare uses this scene to train King James on what good kingship looks like. It's quite a subtle thing. How is he training King James? Well, he's performing the play for King James, so he knows King James is going to watch it. And he is the most important audience member. So it's quite subtle here. He's trying to suggest to King James what sort of king he should be. Why do that now? Well, just imagine you're King James, and you're not necessarily welcomed by everybody coming to England, taking over from one of the greatest monarchs there's ever been, Queen Elizabeth, who's been incredibly successful at home and abroad, fighting off the Spanish invasion in 1588, exploring swathes of the Pacific and the Atlantic, Drake basically being a legal, in terms of British law, pirate who's gone off and plundered the Spaniards and the Portuguese. You know, fantastic queen, at least the way history views her at the time. And then here's James, who very few people want on the throne. And he's desperately insecure because a whole group of people have just tried to assassinate him, and they nearly got away with it. So the natural reaction from such a king would be repression. Right, I'm going to execute anyone who's a Catholic, or I'm going to imprison them. I'm going to get spies across the country to try and get informers. In other words, this is the kind of behaviour that Macbeth exhibits in the play, and Shakespeare shows Macbeth's behaviour in this light in order to show King James what not to do. And on the other hand, he shows Malcolm as a version of kingship that he thinks James should follow. So Malcolm pretends to be a king who is just after cutting off nobles' heads in order to get their lands. So what Shakespeare's pointing out here is that James could go after all these Catholic families, who were Catholic a generation ago before Henry VIII split with the Catholic Church, and executing them and taking those lands for himself. And he's advising King James not to do that. So Malcolm pretends that he would forge quarrels, unjust quarrels against the good and loyal, destroying them for wealth. So he could destroy these Catholic people in order to acquire not just their lands, but all their other assets, their farms, their jewels, whatever. So this interlude in the play is actually really frustrating, and most directors cut it because it's got nothing to do really with the story of Macbeth. And it's got nothing to do with Macduff coming back and getting revenge on Macbeth. But to Shakespeare it was crucially important because it's the lesson he's teaching King James, or the lesson he hopes he's teaching King James. Not a lot of people know that. Now we come to Banquo and his observation, but that myself should be the root and father of many kings. If there come truth from them, that's from the witches, as upon thee, Macbeth, their speeches shine, why by the verities on thee made good, may they not be my oracles as well, and set me up in hope. So what he's saying here is that God might have chosen him to be the father of many kings. The root, if you like. And what's important about this is many people at the time, or everybody at the time, believed that Banquo was an ancestor of King James. So Shakespeare tries to portray Banquo as a morally good character who doesn't make the same decisions as Macbeth, doesn't try to assassinate him, for example, in order for Fleance to be able to take over in future. So by presenting Banquo as a good and noble man, he's trying to show that King James comes from a good and noble line. Shakespeare also makes Macbeth comment on this. So when he's deciding to kill Banquo, he says, "Our fears in Banquo stick deep, and in his royalty of nature." So this alludes directly to his own nature making him royal. The idea that from birth he has been chosen by God, the divine right. So Banquo has been chosen by God in order to be the father of many kings. And that's why he also uses the word reigns here. "'Tis much he dares, and to that dauntless temper of his mind, he hath a wisdom that doth guide his valour to act in safety." So, interestingly, Macbeth sees in Banquo cunning and daring. So he doesn't see Banquo as a wholly good person. He sees Banquo as taking advantage of the political situation at the minute, and his wisdom is to keep quiet. He hasn't accused Macbeth of killing Duncan, and he hasn't started any kind of rebellion against Macbeth. He's simply acting in safety. In other words, biding his time, hoping that Fleance will grow up enough to take advantage of future events. We don't know what they are. He doesn't know what they are, but to keep safe until the right time when Fleance is going to become king. Now, if Fleance is the ancestor of King James, then Shakespeare, you would think, would want to present Fleance as a good human being. So we get a description of what he will look like as a king when Macbeth revisits the witches, and the final vision that he's shown is of all these kings lining up, descended from Banquo. So let's read it. "Thou art too like the spirit of Banquo," so this will be Fleance. "Down! Thy crown does sear mine eyeballs." So this is proof that to him that Fleance is going to become king and wear the crown. "And thy hair, thou other gold-bound brow, is like the first." So he deliberately chooses the Banquo's children to be blonde, gold-bound, so that their hair matches the gold of the crown. "What, will the line stretch out to the crack of doom?" So doom is doomsday, when judgment day, if you like, when God sorts everyone out and sends the sinners to hell and the good people go to heaven. So Shakespeare here is suggesting that Fleance is so good and that Banquo was so good that King James's line will last forever. This, of course, is political propaganda. Kings' heritage never lasts that long. Either there's a war or you run out of male heirs and somebody else takes over, just as King James took over because Queen Elizabeth had no heirs. "And yet the eighth appears," which would be King James, "who bears a glass," that's a mirror, "which shows me many more." So he's suggesting that James is going to have many children who will, become king, and their children will become king, and so on. "And some I see that twofold balls and treble sceptres carry." Horrible sight. So this is the symbol of having the English throne as well as the Scottish one. And this, of course, is Shakespeare's message, not just to King James now, but to the people. Look, this is the king that we've got. Let's make the best of it. Actually, he's been chosen by God. He's descended from this wonderful human being that I'm putting before you, Banquo, and therefore we should accept him as he is. This is just ingratiating himself with his sponsor, his patron, King James. It's quite cynical, really, if we look at it that way, but we can also see it as Shakespeare deliberately trying to keep social order. He knows that there are people, important people watching his play, who will want to start some kind of rebellion or revolution, and he doesn't want that. For whatever reasons, he wants a London that is at peace. There might be selfish reasons, there might be grand reasons, but that's why he brings this great moment of peace at the end of the play, restoring the rightful King Malcolm, and then suggesting that Fleance will take over. And there is some ambiguity there because we don't know if Fleance is going to take over. Naturally, Malcolm might just decide that Fleance is going to be his successor, or if there's going to be some more violent kind of acts that will get rid of Malcolm and replace him with Fleance. Now, Shakespeare doesn't put that in because that would obviously give the wrong political message, because it would suggest that you can replace a king with somebody else who's very good, like Fleance will be. So, hopefully that was an informative video. This is the first screen of my next one, which will be on tyranny. Do subscribe or just check out my uploads. For that should be coming soon this week. Thank you very much for watching, and good luck with your revision.